Hello, Gold Derby. I am Daniel Montgomery, senior editor with Gold Derby, and I'm here with one of our writers and users, Tony Ruiz, who has given us his analyses in blog items about the lead acting races at the Daytime Emmys, Best Actor and Best Actress in a Drama Series, and he's here to talk with us today to talk about these acting races. We will also do videos that you can see shortly that we will discuss the supporting acting races, and sometime soon we will do the younger acting races and the new guest acting races, which are only in their second year. So it's a very, very exciting year for the Daytime Emmys. And one of the interesting things is that the episodes still seem to matter more or less. At the Primetime Emmys, we have a new voting system, and where last year there's a question about whether those episodes really have as much influence anymore. What I love about the Daytime Emmys is that the episodes really do still, at the moment, seem to play a role in this, a big factor in these decisions. So what do you think in general about the system, the episodes you've seen so far? Is this a good crop? Is this a bad crop of nominees?
I think in most of the categories that I've watched, it's really a good crop. There's at least two, if not three, major categories where you could flip a coin and anybody who would win would be worthy. There's very few instances where I can say, not really a great submission. But I mean, there's some really, particularly in the two lead acting races, there's really just great submissions going on.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's surprising. Like I've seen so far the lead and the supporting categories in their entirety, and what usually happens is there will be two or three really good ones, or at least good enough that you understand how they got in, and then there's almost always like one or two that you just wonder, how did this get in? But there's absolutely no one like that this year. So let's get started talking about Best Actor. I'm just going to name all five nominees that got in this year. Tyler Christopher from General Hospital, Anthony Geary from General Hospital, and then we have three actors from The Young and the Restless. Justin Hartley, who is a nominee for the first time, Christian LeBlanc, who has won 3 times, and Christophe St. John, who is nominated for lead actor for the first time, but he has won younger and he has won supporting, so he'd be only the second actor in Emmy history, Daytime Emmy history, to win at all 3 levels. And I should mention that Anthony Geary has won Best Actor 8 times. That's already a record. He's going for 9. That would be a record for all performers in Emmy history, tying Cloris Leachman. And Tyler Christopher has not yet won an Emmy. He has been nominated before in supporting and younger. So let's start at the very top with Tyler Christopher's episode. Tell us a little bit about what he submitted and what you thought about it.
This was I remember when this episode first aired, there was a lot of buzz about it because it really is a powerhouse submission for him. Basically, his character, Nicholas Cassadine, is at the hospital. His son has been badly burned in a fire on Nicholas's birthday, and he plays the whole gamut of being, nervous about his son, being the terrified father, questioning whether he did enough to help his son. Then there's a really great scene where there's a doctor who he has some animosity towards, and he doesn't want her anywhere near his son, so he gets a lot of anger. It's just an absolute, powerhouse of a submission. He shows a lot of range. There's a lot of sympathy, and we know how range, sympathy, and impact are the 3 keys. I mean, that is from the Tom O'Neill Bible, and I was really caught off guard about how much I responded to it.
Yeah, I had read your analyses before I actually watched these submissions, and which I usually don't do. I usually am able to go in cold for the first time, but in this case, I hadn't had a chance to see them before. I read your analyses that you wrote for us and that we have published recently in the last week or two, and I liked it too. And I think personally, and I think you agree with this, if anyone's going to beat Anthony Geary, it's probably going to be Tyler Christopher. That would not be an upset that would entirely surprise me. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about this category, particularly from my point of view, is that there were really two reels that just screamed Emmy, and this was one of them. And I think that if Geary wasn't in the mix, I think we'd be talking about Christopher as a front runner, because I mean, this is just classic Emmy bait. I mean, we've seen so many times in Emmy history where, you know, when there's a tearful scene next to somebody who's in a coma, that does really well. And it hit me, you know, really, it had a lot of impact with me as a parent myself, that, you know, I can totally identify with all of those feelings. And what I like about it is that there were a lot of points where I felt like he could have gone over the top, and just when he starts to like go there, he pulls back and it becomes more internal, and it just felt real. It didn't feel like over the top and hysterical. It was very tightly controlled. I think that the only weakness was there was, you know, towards the end of the reel, it's a lot, most of the really big moments are in the first, you know, 6 or 7 minutes of it. And there's this really awkward thing when he's talking to the doctor. I don't know if you noticed this, that kind of felt like a public service announcement for Shriners Hospital.
It's absolutely, it totally clanged for me. I'm just like, oh, I literally paused the video and I Googled just to make sure it was a real hospital, because it sounded familiar. It's like, oh my goodness, they just did an ad for Shriners Hospital in the
Yeah.
Yeah, so go on. That was distracting.
But yeah, that totally took me out of it for a second. But I think that the majority of the reel is so good, and you know, it just felt like a real situation happening, and I didn't feel like I was being toyed with, except for that one little moment. But the only thing that might hurt him is I thought the end of the reel had a lot less impact and a lot less dynamic stuff, and especially when you're going against Tony Geary. You know, any opening, you got to use all of that time.
Yeah, and you know, I feel like, you know, there are certain things that are really good for if you want to win an Emmy or be nominated at least in you know, for a solid reel. Put a character's child in danger, preferably mortal danger, and they get to be really, really, you know, overwhelmed with emotion. I remember one of my favorite Emmy reels, or one of my favorite weeks in soap opera history, was about 10 years ago. Nancy Lee Grahn, her daughter was in the hospital, needed some kind of transplant. She needed her daughter to induce labor on her baby, so it was a complex thing, but it was amazing. Amazing week, and she submitted a reel from that, and that's one of my favorite episode submissions in Emmy history. But yeah, put someone's child in danger, or as we see in a lot of these other reels, affairs, affair revelations, paternity or maternity. Well, not maternity. We haven't seen a maternity mystery.
Not in a while, no.
That would be interesting. I don't know how you pull that off. Like, I didn't notice I was carrying a baby for 9 months, and
Isn't there a whole TLC show about that?
Oh, that's true. That's true. But when they do
I didn't know I was pregnant.
Yeah, but when they give birth, I assume most of them figure it out.
Yeah, you hope so.
But yeah, let's move on to the elephant in the room, which is Anthony Geary, General Hospital. He has the longest reel, 19 minutes long, which is longer than any reel that any actor submitted in any category, as far as I can tell. Although one of the Best Actress nominees does come close, and it's a big. There's a lot going on in that submission too. Just tell us a little bit about that episode.
Yeah, and actually the rules specifically say for submitting reels for the Daytime Emmys that you cannot go longer than 20 minutes. 20 minutes is the longest, and his is, I think, 1945. So he gets like right up there. What can I say? This is if honestly, if we weren't talking about Tony Geary for the 9th time and some of the controversy associated with it, this would be a slam dunk. This was the 52nd anniversary show, where and it's pretty much just dominated by Geary. Luke Spencer, after the whole Fluke storyline, which won him the Emmy again last year, comes to realize that he has repressed a memory. He's in his childhood home, and he, through flashbacks, relives this traumatic night in his house where by the end of the reel you learn that he was trying to protect his mother but accidentally kills his mother, and then in a rage kills his own father. Now, why is this great? Geary just sells it as Luke. He's fantastic. But what really puts this over the top is he hits a couple of Emmy sweet spots. He also plays a dual role. He plays his own father. He plays Luke's father, Tim Spencer, who is a drunk, who is abusive, who has these really loud, just angry tirades. And so you get the automatic range there of sad, traumatized Luke and angry, raging, alcoholic Tim Spencer. And that just, to me, I don't see how Geary loses this. If we're going based on submission alone, I don't see how he loses. It's so just dynamic and so much range and so much impact. And Geary ends the reel. The last moment of the reel is, first you have Tim Spencer screaming at young Luke, saying, "You killed your mother." I mean, just screaming it at him. And then when Luke realizes that that's what happened, he just collapses in a sobbing pile, on the floor. And I'm just like, okay, game over.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think Anthony Geary at times, at least when I'm watching a performance like this, he sometimes can veer into Al Pacino territory where he's big and just bigger and bigger and bigger, and it can be a little bit of a liability at times. Like if I were judging just the performances very minutely, I'd say Tyler Christopher's is much more modulated.
Right.
And much more careful, where Anthony Geary is just attacking it, going full bore for the whole reel, which could be a liability, I would think, if he hadn't won last year for that fluke storyline where he's playing himself and an imposter. And the episode he submitted last year, I predicted he would lose stupidly because it's a dual role and it's Anthony Geary. So I don't know what I was thinking, but I just didn't think the reel was very good. And this runs circles around last year's reel. So if he won for that one, this should be a slam dunk.
And if you look at a lot of if you look at all 8 of his reels that he's won for, I mean, he's won for really, dark, black storylines. I think his 7th one, he won for an episode, where he kind of like tosses his son aside to protect him. And he goes to this dark place. I mean, these are not. I just don't see with this, based on what he's won before with, and I don't necessarily, if I look back at all of his wins, I wouldn't say that all of them, and especially last year's, were deserved. But this, I think, is one of the strongest ones he's ever submitted. And again, the fact that he is Anthony Geary and the fact that he won last year for a weaker episode, I don't see how he's not in front on this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. And the 20-minute rule is interesting. I kind of like the idea of it, except I don't think it should be a maximum. I feel like there should be a set range. It's like you can submit as many scenes as you want from as many episodes as you want, as long as they hit, let's say, a 15 to 20-minute range.
Right. And the rule also is that they can only, the 20 minutes has to be comprised from only 2 episodes.
Yeah, I think that could be adjusted, because I feel like if you have one amazing standout episode like Anthony Geary and that gives you your 20 minutes, that's fine. But I think it's fair, like if you don't have that one to kind of, I mean, yeah, and it could work against you too. If you're splicing too many different episodes together, there's not going to be any emotional continuity. So,
right. Which is a problem that some of the other nominees have.
Absolutely, yeah, and so, but I like the idea that, instead of apples and oranges, you're sort of, which it always is anyway, because actors giving different performances, but you're at least evaluating sort of a similar range of time they're given to give a performance. And speaking of which, we're talking about the Young and the Restless guys, who have such a wide range of screen time, but I don't think they all make as much with it as the others do. So let's start with the shortest one. The shortest reel in this category is Christophe St. John. We talked about Anthony Geary's 20 minutes, spectacular. Christophe St. John's reel is about just under 5 minutes. And they say size doesn't matter, but I think in terms of an Emmy reel, I really think it does.
I completely agree.
So I think he's probably out of it just on on length alone. But tell me about his reel and what you thought of it.
His reel consists of two episodes that aired somewhat of a distance apart. But the problem is that with that reel, in the first half, he's on a private plane and he's basically, confronting his wife and his son after discovering that his wife and son slept together while he was recovering from blindness. Need I say more? And so it's a very angry scene. He's yelling a lot, and it's good. There's two problems. Number one is that's really the only emotion. There's not a lot of range there, I don't think, at least not for me. And then the second half of the reel, he's in a bar and his son is trying to apologize for sleeping with his father's wife while he was blind. And, there's some, and St. John is just not having it at all and basically saying the way you can make it up to me is go upstairs and become a drunk like me. And so then we get the alcohol on top of it. So it's just an angry reel, and St. John is good, but there's not a whole lot of meat in it. And the two just feel completely disjointed and separate. And I can't believe that he couldn't find something a little bit more substantial to get nominated, but apparently it worked. So.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it closes really well. I mean, you mentioned that scene at the bar where he's telling his son, "Here's how you can make it up with me. Go up and become a drunk like me." I thought that was his best moment of the entire reel.
I do too.
And which one, because it's so specific and personal. When you're stuck in that first half of the reel, it's like, my son slept with my wife while I was blind. There's not enough time for him to even get past that. Just the idea of that. So when he's actually just one-on-one in the bar, I thought that was a really strong moment. And that might be what did it is, he left the voters with a strong last impression with that reel. But yeah, and we're talking about this. It seems outlandish, oh, my son slept with my wife. But we were discussing a little bit on Facebook earlier how parent-child love triangles are a recurring theme at these Daytime Emmy reels. There are 3 different actors so far. I haven't gotten through all the younger acting reels or guest acting reels, so maybe there's even more I haven't seen. But 3 different actors from 3 different shows submitted storylines from a parent-child love triangle, and they get even creepier than this one. So,
oh man.
We'll talk about more of those in the supporting actress category in our next video. But let's move on to the other 2 Young and the Restless Men, and I want to move on to Justin Hartley because he has the second longest reel in this category, I believe. It's about 15 minutes long, so it's the sort of thing where I went into it thinking, okay, he's going to be the threat. He's going to be someone who could really give Tyler Christopher, Anthony Geary a run for their money. Let's see what you got. And it didn't quite live up to the promise of, Christophe St. John does more with 5 minutes than I think Hartley does in 15, which is not necessarily Hartley's fault. It's just sort of the nature of that storyline, which is even more outlandish. Describe that, please.
Yeah, basically, Justin took over the role of Adam Newman after Michael Muhney was let go from the show. And initially, when he came on, he was playing somebody else. He was playing somebody named Gabriel, and he's been playing this part for a while. And so Adam is sitting in Victor Newman's office alone and talking to his father's painting, and saying, "Well, here's to us, Dad." And his former wife comes in and overhears him confess this, and she confronts him, and he basically, the rest of the reel, the majority of it is just him trying to explain why he's been playing this part for so long and why he can't let anybody find out about it. And it's basically him pleading with his wife to build a new life and keep their secret. And the problem that I had with the reel, and Hartley's good, and he's been very good over the course of the year. He's really made the role his own. The problem is there's just not a lot here. It's a lot of exposition, and his wife. And I just felt like there wasn't enough here. I think you're spot on that St. John does more with 5 minutes than Hartley does with 15.
Yeah, and there's another factor in here, the fact, and something I noticed also in some of the supporting actor nominations is the co-star factor.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa Claire Egan, because it's his storyline. He's like driving it in the sense that this is what's going on with me. Here's what's happening, yada yada. But she is the one experiencing the emotional effect. She is finding out this big secret. She has to decide whether she wants to be with him, to keep his secret, to let him raise their child. And there are moments where she really kind of blows him off the screen. And I noticed this with some of the other male nominees in the supporting category. Where some of them hold their own, but I feel like a lot of them, like, oh my goodness, that feels like your co-star is real, not your real.
Yeah.
And you're right. There's just not a lot of emoting for Hartley. We know how the Emmys love big emoting, and it's not even the kind of modulated tears that Tyler Christopher gives us. It's just sort of delivering storyline, telling what's going on, asking we can be together, but there's no big emotional impact to it. And I think, that's really lacking in his reel.
I completely agree. And I think that's a problem in a lot of the reels. I wrote in both of my articles and in the ones that I'm working on for the supporting categories that so many times I found myself having to say, so-and-so is upstaged by, and that makes I have to think that makes a difference to voters,
Yeah, and okay, so the last nominee for Best Actor is Christian LeBlanc. He has won this 3 times before. He's been nominated 9 or 10 times. I lost count. And he submitted another one of those really strong kind of Emmy baity kind of storylines, which if you're not going to put a child in mortal danger, cancer. Just but it has an interesting dimension to it. It's not quite the same I'm dying kind of cancer reel. He's also afraid of his masculinity because he has prostate cancer, and so he's worried that the treatment will make him no longer able to perform for his wife. So tell us a little bit about that reel and what happens in that one.
The reel is in 2 parts. The first part, which to me was the less effective part, is basically him talking to a doctor and saying, I thought we weren't going to do this type of treatment and I'm determined to find other ways to do it. And then his wife begs him to have the treatment, and he does. Really, the meat of the reel is the second half, where he's hired and the episode aired much later. There's been some time that's passed. He's in a hotel room and he hires a hooker. And what seems to start off as a standard, hooker transaction, I guess you could say, it becomes really kind of like an emotional confession about what he wants and why he wants it, about losing everything that he is and that he's afraid to die, but he understands that it will happen. So while he's still around, he doesn't want to be half a man. And what's really, I thought, effective about that is that this storyline could have come off as vain, but LeBlanc really sells the emotion of it. And LeBlanc, in a lot of his other Emmy reels, he's given much bigger performances, big, long, emotional monologues that have helped him win 3 times. I was surprised at how understated he was and how he really sold the emotion without being overly emotional in a way. And I think that it's a really, really strong reel. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a lot of votes, but compared to Geary and Christopher's reel, I think that it's still a very competitive reel.
Oh, I do too. I think I have him ranked 3rd behind Geary and Christopher. I think
I do too.
And as you mentioned, LeBlanc is an actor who is not a stranger to the top and the realms beyond it. It was either last year or the year before he submitted a reel where, and he was nominated for it, where he was confronting his wife about an affair, and like there's this moment where he's like throwing furniture across the room, and it's like, oh my goodness, just like a couple notches down, just a couple
Yeah,
notches.
just a little bit back on planet Earth.
And he's a great actor. Like, I mean, when he won 3 Emmys, and I wouldn't begrudge him. Well, I can't remember all of them, but I know, like, especially when he won his first one, like, he was so due at that point. He's been
Right.
so long. And this episode kind of reminded me of what I originally loved about his work. So I really, really, really like this reel, and I like this category in general. Even someone like, Christophe St. John, who doesn't have a lot of time, and Justin Hartley, who has a lot of time but not a lot of impact. I don't think either of those reels are embarrassing. Like
No, I don't either.
They're not.
I'm actually surprised at how I think it's a reflection of the fact that there really is. I mean, the way these are selected. I mean, these actors are pre-nominated, and then they submit these reels, and these reels are not only what determines the nomination, but also the winner. And so, I think, even though that, St. John's reel and Hartley's reel are a little bit, less powerful, impactful, whatever word you want to use, I think it's a sign that there was, that these actors did do really, really strong work. And probably, again, one of the things that's always unfair about this is that you're only seeing a short bit of what they have done over the course of a season. So, I have no complaints with this category. There's not one of these guys that I would say, oh yeah, why are they here? Who did they steal a nod from?
Yeah, and that happens so often, so I'm very glad that's not the case. But you and I both seem to be agreed that Geary on paper can't call anyone a lock at any kind of Emmy event, but based on submissions, Geary should have it sewn up. It looks like the kind of thing that would win in any year.
And can we talk about one of the external factors that might impact Geary?
Absolutely.
There was a lot of he gave a couple of interviews after his departure from GH, where he was very honest about his displeasure with some of the stories that he'd been given, about the way some real criticisms about the industry as a whole, and some people didn't respond very kindly to that. I mean, this is a guy who made his fortune and his name off of this character for 37 years. And so there could be some bad feeling. It depends on who's voting and what they think. There could also be voter fatigue, but if they're not tired of him yet, I don't see it. So I would say it's a good shot for Geary, but not a lock. But the factors that make him not a lock are not having anything to do with his reel. I mean, if reel alone, I'd vote for Geary.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure that will hurt him that much personally. First of all, he left the show after all this, so it's not just him running his mouth. It's him sort of like, he has this reputation as an outspoken kind of renegade bad boy kind of actor who you're not necessarily surprised when he speaks that candidly and forthrightly.
Yeah.
Necessarily that flatteringly. I also think there might be even a contingent of people who might even blame the industry for driving him out rather than blaming him for slagging off the industry. Because he did sort of, I mean, they gave him this great farewell storyline, obviously, but he did sort of walk off the show in a huff in kind of a sense. I don't know. I think some people might actually admire that. Some people might hold it against him. I think it might end up being kind of a wash in terms of how it influences the race.
Yeah, it might just end up going back to the tape, and then we're back where we started.
Yeah. And speaking of tapes, we're going to talk about Best Actress next, and I think I think this is a harder category for me to call. I think for you as well. Two, I think even though I don't think anyone has a Geary level tape in this category, but I feel like top to bottom, they're more consistent from, every nominee. Even though we have the same range, we have 17 minutes down to like 5 or 6 minutes or something.
Right.
So let's start at the bottom, which feels bad to say the bottom, but the shortest reel, and I don't think either of us has her winning, Tracy Bregman from The Young and the Restless. She's nominated for Best Actress for the first time. Actually, I haven't named all 5 of the nominees. Let me do that first. Tracy Bregman, The Young and the Restless. She's a past winner of Younger Actress. This is her first nomination for lead. Kassie DePaiva, Days of Our Lives. She's been in soap operas for decades. This is only her 2nd nomination in her career. She was nominated once for Best Actress for One Life to Live, but One Life to Live actors were cursed, so we can talk about that soon.
Unless, of course, you were Erica Slezak.
Unless, of course, you were Erica Slezak. But if she had been on another soap, I bet she'd have like 15 Emmys. Like
yeah, quite possibly.
And then Mary Beth Evans, also Days of Our Lives. This is her first nomination for acting. And she's been in the industry for just as long as Kassie DePaiva, if not longer. Although she does have a win last year for producing The Bay, I believe, which is a short format digital series. And then there's Finola Hughes from General Hospital. She's been nominated several times. Was nominated last year for supporting actress. She won for this role 25 years ago. She was the first actress from General Hospital to win Best Actress. Since then, a couple others have, including the last nominee in this category, Maura West, who won this category last year for General Hospital, and she won also twice more for As the World Turns several years ago. So she has 3 wins, so they love her. So starting with Bregman, she has the shortest reel. She plays the wife of Christian LeBlanc, we talked about in the Best Actor race. And of course, and so unsurprisingly, she submitted an episode from the same storyline dealing with Michael Baldwin, her husband's cancer. So tell us about her reel.
You know what's interesting is that about her reel, the whole reel is basically one scene as far as I'm concerned, because it's basically her sitting with Michael at a cafe saying, refusing. He wants her to divorce him, and she refuses to do so. She says he's being, cowardly, and that she wants to support him. And then he throws out that he saw her kissing another man. And she basically has this monologue at the end where she talks about how, she kept reaching out to Michael and Michael kept pushing her away, and she was desperate for attention. Now, the scene itself is very short. It's I think 5 minutes long. And it certainly it certainly lacks the scope of all of the other reels in this category. But I have to say, I don't know why, but especially the last 3 minutes of the scene, I really loved what she did. It was very emotional. She conveyed both anger, sadness, kind of like despair, resentment, and she really gave it to him. And I think that if she had maybe a longer reel with, some other scenes that would kind of fit in with this storyline, I think we'd be talking about her more. I was really, really struck by it.
I was too, and it was the last reel I watched of these 5. So, of course, being the shortest reel, it was sort of a tough act to follow with the other women. But it's interesting. Even though it's the shortest reel, I thought it was also the most consistent. I thought, I can think of, there were a couple of maybe some dodgy moments on every other reel, every single one.
Exactly.
There are a lot of high points in those other reels, but there also come, a couple of moments for me on every other reel. Of course, she doesn't have time to have any of those low points. but so it's not necessarily in her favor that, she only submitted 4 minutes, so she makes fewer mistakes, or there are fewer flaws in her reel. But even still, I thought, this belongs here. She gave a 5-minute performance. It absolutely belongs among these other performances, which are all 10 minutes plus.
Yeah.
And I was really, really kind of impressed with the work she did, and the fact that she does something really tricky with this scene, which is his character has cancer, and she's yelling at him.
Yeah.
And she is the sympathetic party. She makes that happen, and that's incredible. And it's because he's also a little bit, in trying to push her away, he's also kind of slut shaming her. He's saying like, if my treatment takes away my ability to perform sexually, then you'll just leave me because you want sex from all these other guys.
Right.
he's really kind of treating her like garbage, and she really calls him out on that.
And that's when she lets him have it, and I think that's her best moment. She's like, is that what you think of me? Is that the only thing that you think I want? And I was really pleasantly surprised. It was actually the first reel that I watched, and mostly because that at that length I didn't expect anything of it. I really did not think there would be that much meat to it, but she's fantastic. She belongs in this category. You're absolutely right.
Okay, next up, let's talk about Kassie DePaiva for Days of Our Lives. And of course, she was on One Life to Live for 20 years as Blair Kramer, her best known role by far. She was nominated for 1 Emmy for that role for Best Actress. And it was the year Best Actress had like 8 nominees.
Eight nominees.
If that hadn't happened, knowing One Life to Live and its poor track record over the years in terms of acting categories, if it hadn't gone to 8, she probably wouldn't have even gotten that. And that I remember actually that year she submitted an episode from her live week of One Life.
Oh, that's right.
A week of live shows, and she found out in one of those live shows a big secret her husband Todd Manning was keeping from her, and she submitted one of those episodes, big fireworks, yelling, and she's doing it live. She was nominated for it. She lost to Erica Slezak, of course, because almost everyone does, unless you're Heather.
Because everybody loses to Erica Slezak.
Unless you're Heather Tom.
Unless you're Heather Tom, yeah.
But you know, I want to get this off my chest first, because One Life to Live was my pet show for years and years and years, and it was cursed. And it wasn't the actor's fault. It wasn't like, oh, this show doesn't have as good acting as the other shows, and you can see evidence for that, because Gina Tognoni, she was on One Life to Live for years as a Kelly Kramer, Blair's sister, actually. She not a single Emmy nomination. As soon as she leaves for Guiding Light, she wins twice. And then you have Kristen Alderson, who played Star Manning, Blair's daughter. 13, 14, 15 years on One Life to Live as that character. Not a single.
I know where you're going.
She takes the same character with the same head writer and producer to General Hospital and wins on her first try. One Life to Live was cursed. They hated that show for some reason. And now we see it again with Kassie DePaiva. She 20 years, 1 Emmy nomination for One Life to Live. She's over at Days of Our Lives for like 1 year, or a couple of years. I think she was on over at Days.
Yeah.
And here she is, an Emmy nominee, a much deserved Emmy nominee. But she would not be the same reel with the same acting and the same on One Life to Live. She would not have been nominated. Period. I just don't understand that at all.
I think she has a good shot here. I think she has a really strong shot here.
I do too, and this is one of those reels that like has some of the highest highs and not necessarily the lowest lows, but a couple moments that I'm like, ooh, I wish that moment was on your reel. But tell us about her reel and her storyline, and again, we talked about children in peril. We have an extreme version of that in this one.
Yes, and we also have one of Kassie DePaiva's main storylines was the fact that she was sleeping with her daughter's boyfriend, which actually fits into Melissa Reeves' reel, but we'll talk about that later. But in this reel, Eve, Kassie DePaiva, is mourning the loss of her daughter who has been murdered. And she's going through all of her daughter's things, and then A. Martinez shows up as her former husband, the father of the dead child, and she lays into him about, where have you been, and now you're coming to mourn our daughter, where were you our daughter's life? And it's really, really great, that first half. And then we go to the scene where they're burying her, and where they're burying Eve's daughter, and Eve is standing by the coffin alone, and then she sees the ghost of her daughter, and the ghost talks to her in one of the cheesy moments of the reel. That's kind of the cringe. I don't know if you thought it was cringeworthy, but the way it was shot, it was so it's like, oh, here's some bright light over a character just standing here. Oh God. But it's still well done.
Yeah.
Pardon my dogs. And then there's a short scene at the end where she just rages at Melissa Reeves. and has a nice big angry outburst with crying and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, she runs the gamut in this reel, and it's really powerful stuff. It's the type of stuff soaps are made of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with you about the scene with the daughter. Not necessarily just because of the idea of it, because there's been obviously we talked about parent-child love triangles and all that sort of stuff. It's not the weirdest thing in any of these
It was
reels.
the execution. It seemed hokey to me.
Yeah, it's just a bright light over an actor's head while she's pretending to be a ghost. It just felt a little bit off.
Spared no expense.
Yeah. But luckily for Kassie DePaiva, unless she was in charge of lighting or writing or anything like that, I don't think anyone will hold that against her. Because I think when she actually gets into that scene and her daughter is saying, "You have to forgive herself. You have to forgive yourself for all the mistakes that she made," obviously while her daughter was alive. She nails it. I think she does a really good job with it. And and then the next scene with yelling at everyone for I think that's one of those moments where she goes maybe a tad over.
Yeah.
And she did that on One Life to Live sometimes too. But I when she dials it in, like her scene with A. Martinez, not even necessarily the yelling, but sort of the tender parts of those scenes. I think she just knocks it right out of the park. I thought it was just absolutely fantastic. I really hope she wins. She is the only woman in this category without an Emmy in any category.
Yes.
Of course, the One Life to Live curse was holding her back all this time. Now that she's free of the One Life to Live curse, I mean, she might just win over and over and over again. Maybe the next soap she's on, she gets another couple of Emmys. Just keep them coming, because she's been overdue for so long.
And she really was the lead of Days of Our Lives last year. I mean, Eve was at the center of a lot of different stories, and it really was like a catalyst for so many different stories. And that scene with A. Martinez, it's really nice to see him, doing that kind of work. I'm surprised I don't know if he was on the show for longer than that, or whether he would have gotten a guest nod, but that's just a fantastic scene. There's so much tension, and yet there really is a tenderness between the two of them. And if she wins, I'm thrilled.
And moving on to Mary Beth Evans, her co-star. I don't think she has quite as good a shot as Kassie DePaiva, but I do think she also submitted solidly, at least the first
half.
The first half. Well, it's really the first 2/3 of her reel, because I think that last is just like 3 or 4 minutes long.
Yeah.
Luckily. So she plays Kayla, and this is her first nomination for this role. She won last year as a producer of The Bay, as I mentioned, and she's nominated for The Bay again as a producer and actress in a digital drama. So she's nominated 3 times this year. She has quadrupled her Emmy nominations haul this year alone, which is kind of amazing. So tell us about her reel.
The first part of her reel is her telling her brother, Beau, that he has a brain tumor that is not going to get any better, and that it will ultimately take his life. And it's a very, very good, solid, emotional, she struggles with telling him the truth and yet being supportive, and, not wanting to tell him this bad news, but knowing that as a doctor, she has to. And there's a lot of anguish in the scene. The last 3 to 4 minutes is from a completely different episode and a completely different. I can't even remember. I'd have to look back and see how far they aired apart, because there's no connection to the previous story at all. It's her and Patch, her on again, off again man for the last 30 years, locked in a storage closet. And they've been exposed to some sort of chemical or drug that's making them incredibly loopy. And so I think she probably put it in because, it's more lighthearted, a little bit comedic, and shows, a really nice contrast with the anguish and the crying from the first half. So it's a good submission. It's not a great submission, I don't think. I actually thought that the reel wasn't enough about her character. I mean, the first half of the reel, even when she's doing all this emoting, the whole reel is just about her telling her brother. He's the one that we feel for the most. And so I have her in fifth. not based on her performance, but based on just kind of like the lack of meat to that. And I thought the whole last scene was completely unnecessary, and just I was like, okay, thank you. What was the point of that?
Yeah, I felt the same way about that end of that reel, and I understand the impulse behind it because like we say, you know, as you mentioned, impact, sympathy, and range is what they're going for. Whenever someone submits a comic episode, they're trying to get that range. It's like, see, I can do drama and comedy, but it almost never works.
Unless you're Tony Geary.
Unless you're Tony Geary, yeah. Well,
two of his have been for they used to be able to submit 2 episodes, and he would always submit 1 comedy, 1 drama.
well, yeah, Anthony Geary is sort of the asterisk on everything. So, like, unless you're Anthony Geary or Erica Slezak, if you're trying something different, don't expect it to work.
Right.
The comedy, and it's a worthwhile thing. I mentioned that Nancy Lee Grahn storyline from about 10 years ago, where she had that amazing episode submission. I remember that year she paired it up with like chopping down a Christmas tree with her husband, and she was going for the lighthearted comedy with that. And you just lost the Emmy. You just lost. And I think that was the same year as actually Kassie DePaiva, when they both lost to Slezak. Who that year submitted 2 episodes from like a heart transplant storyline.
Heart transplant.
It was agonizing and emotional, and she didn't chop down a Christmas tree or get loopy on drugs. So we want range, but it should be dramatic range, or at least that's what the Emmy voters are looking for. They want to see not that you can do lighthearted and dramatic, unless you're Anthony Geary. They want to see that you can do different levels of drama. They want to see anger. They want to see sadness. They want to see inward. They want to see outward. They want to see, you know, a lot of.
And I also think that the range is important, but I think what can easily knock somebody out is if they have a reel that's hard to follow. Like, if you can't understand why you're going from point A to point B, to me, the best submissions in all of these categories are ones that tell a cohesive story, that even if the episodes are a long time apart, you still know what the thread is that goes through them. And Christian LeBlanc did that. His episodes aired months apart, and you know, we're still on the cancer thing. That's the common thread. With this, there's just no thread to Mary Beth Evans' story.
And speaking of which, the next 2 actually did submit episodes that I believe are some time apart. I don't know how much time apart, but they're definitely not back to back, but they do involve the same storylines, both from General Hospital. First up, Finola Hughes as Anna Devane, who is a police chief. She used to be a spy, all these sorts of stuff. I can't remember what she's doing now, but she has won this category before. She was nominated in supporting last year. She hasn't won in a quarter century. Actually, no General Hospital woman has won this category twice, which is interesting.
That's true.
So tell us about her reel and what you thought of
it. So Anna starts out the reel at the hospital. Her boyfriend Duke, who she was planning to run away with him, has just been shot, and so she's, you know, kind of by his bed trying to wake him up, and then they ask her to leave, let the doctors do their job. I heard that in probably 3 or 4 different reels. Please let us do our jobs. She goes out and confronts the man that she thinks ordered him to be shot, and just lays into him, and he even gets a good slap in there for good measure. But the majority of the reel is a scene that actually aired, I want to say at least 6 months later, where she is in a psychiatrist's office, and she confesses that she shot the man that shot Duke, that she shot him in cold blood, and it's been haunting her. But yet, you know, so she's struggling with that. And what I love about this reel was the very last line, as she leaves, when she says, "Oh, maybe I'll stop hearing his ghost now." I just, that sent chills down my spine. This was my favorite reel, and I probably in the minority on this, but this one, I just love the way it was. She had a really nice contrast with the rage and the anger at the beginning, and with the kind of the more like introspective, emotional, uncomfortable scene in the psychiatrist's office. I just thought she sold it, and it was a very, again, it was a quieter performance, But to me, it was the most real performance that I saw. I felt like I was watching a real person going through this and processing it. And I would love for her to win. I don't think that she will, but it was personally, for me personally, not as a analyst or anything, it was my favorite reel.
Well, I mean, don't necessarily discount that. I remember a couple of years ago, I was looking, all right, here's my favorite reels, and here's what I think is going to win. And it was the first year Amelia Heinle won for Young and the Restless, and she submitted a subtle scene, and then Elizabeth Hendrickson had the big scene, and I'm like, I actually like Heinle better, but I think Hendrickson's going to win, and Heinle won. So sometimes, you know, going with your gut there might actually work. Sometimes subtler is better. I don't think I liked it quite as much as you did. I did like it. I think the first bit in the hospital, I think that's a little not perfect, a little wonky. It's staged weirdly. The slap she gets in is a little choreographed. It doesn't look that convincing, and the yelling is not, it doesn't really
work.
Like,
oh, you were 5 feet away from me. Okay.
but the scene in the psychiatrist office, I really do think that works. And when I read your analysis of it, you talk about how internal and subtle it is. I do think there's a good amount of impact in that scene, even though she's not, you know, slapping people from 5 feet away. You know, it's powerful. It's not cranked up in terms of the volume, but it's, you know, the tears are there, the emotion is there. I think it really, really works well. So I absolutely would not rule this out. I probably have this ranked around third.
Yeah.
It's really close between three women. I think.
I think so. I'm exactly in agreement.
And the next one we're going to talk about, More West, who for me this combo of reels is really the best of times and the worst of times in terms of this category. It's my favorite episode submission in the first half of this category, and my least favorite episode submission in the second half of this category.
Yeah.
And so she plays Ava Jerome, and also pretending to be her twin sister later on. So tell us about that reel.
Yeah, let me see if I can explain this without needing like a study guide. So in the first half, yeah, it's like let's go to the videotape. She starts off as Ava, dying of cancer and begging her boyfriend / doctor to basically kill her. She wants to die, and she wants to die on her terms. And he keeps saying, no, I can't do that. You know, I could do it for anybody else, but I can't do it for you. And she, you know, begs all different ways. And then she thinks about the fact of her last conversations with her children and how she's been able to say goodbye to them. And you're absolutely right. That if she had just submitted that part of it, I mean, she just knocks it out of the park in that one. And I was in the minority last year. I wasn't as fond of the reel that she submitted last year that won her the Emmy. I think this is 1,000 times. That first half is 1,000 times better than the reel that she won with last year. So it would not surprise me to see her win. The second half of the reel is where it gets confusing. Everybody thought Ava was dead, but then this person that looks like Ava came back and is saying that she's Ava's long-lost twin sister. She's wearing a dark wig and has this Marissa Tomei style accent from My Cousin Vinny. And then they jump between scenes of where the doctor boyfriend is saying, no, you're actually Ava, and she's saying, no, I'm not. And then they flash back to Ava after she's been cured of cancer. I was so confused. I mean, I could figure out what was going on, but at the same time, I was like, what? And it's so over the top. And yeah, again, it's the same thing. You know, I know what you're going for. You're going for the range. You're going for the dual character thing, but it's gotta make sense. And it also can't be hokey. And that was the first thing I wrote down when I was watching these reels. I think actually the first thing I wrote down was UGH. It's just ugh. But then the other thing I wrote was hokey. I was like, okay, yeah, I get what you're trying to do here, but it's not working for me.
Yeah, I love the first half of this reel so much, and the second half of the reel, I'm gonna let More West off the hook because I don't think it's a performance problem, even though I don't think the Brooklyn
No, no, no.
is muster. I think it's a story writing editing problem. I think it's very confusing, especially out of context. Out of context, it's pretty indecipherable. How the entire scene is exposition with flashbacks plus. It ends with the bone marrow came from your other daughter, and that's supposed to be a big dramatic moment, but of course, out of context, I have no idea who that
No idea what you're talking about.
so I don't know why that's significant. Is this other daughter a secret daughter? Is she actually dead and back from the dead? Or you don't know anything that's going on in that other thread.
Does the other daughter talk like Marissa Tomei too? I mean,
Yeah, and sometimes a problematic reel can sour a really really good one. That reminds me of another case several years ago, The Young and the Restless, when Cassie died, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
Daughter died. That episode, I think, is the best episode of soap opera I've seen in my life. And they said best drama series. It should have won but they should have submitted another episode from that storyline. It's like, no, you don't need impact and range and all that sort of stuff. Your two best episodes. And they submitted a second episode that had nothing to do with anything. It was just sort of a filler, it didn't really have any dramatic import. Certainly not in connection to the other episode. And it lost to a General Hospital train crash extravaganza, which was two good episodes, put together. And so a sour, a not as good episode can really sour a really, really great submission really, really easily. And I think that might have happened here. Although, I'm with you. I was not as big a fan of More West's reel last year. I didn't expect her to win last year. I think I had her ranked third last year. I think I have her up in second this year just because I've learned my lesson.
Right.
Not put her a notch up. She's won twice or three times before, so we know they like her a lot. They like her recently, and they give awards back to back. Not atypically. That happens. Not rarely. So I wouldn't counter out, but I just feel like, and it's tough because I don't think anyone has a slam dunk, but I'm going with Kassie DePaiva just slightly here.
Yeah, I think I'm going to. I haven't changed my predictions in some time. I'm sticking with Finola because it's the reel that I liked the most. But honestly, if Finola or Cassie or Maura wins, I will, and quite frankly, Tracy Bregman for that matter. I loved that performance. I really did. But if any of those top three win, I have zero complaints. I won't even worry about being wrong because I can totally understand how they went. And that's a great problem to have. It's a great problem to have three performances that are so good, and whatever faults their reels might have, none of their reels is flawless, but any of them is deserving, and I will be thrilled to death.
I think I will be too. And with this and the Best Actor race, we talked about how good both of them are in terms of the consistent quality of the reels. So I think that's a good place to end this slugfest on the lead acting categories. We will reconvene to discuss the supporting categories, and then before the season is done, hopefully later this week or next week, whenever we get a chance, the younger categories and the guest categories. These are all available in our prediction center to make your predictions for lead, supporting, younger, guest acting, drama series. We also have game show categories up and talk show categories up, morning show, the new morning musical performance category that they've got, which is basically the will you pay attention to us if we give Adele an Emmy kind of award. But we won't be evaluating those. We have those videos up on Gold Derby as well, so you can watch the musical performance nominees. But it's been great talking to you, and I will talk to you again in momentarily.
Okay.